We are going to look at something called the account today. And this little graphic is something that we will come back to quite often over the next 2 years. And it is basically a graphic that represents the idea of what makes up the past in comparison to what we examine as part of our role as historians. All right. And so basically what you can see in this graphic is that there's this huge circle, which is the dark blue thing and everything within it, even the different color circles. This represents the past. So this is everything that's ever happened in the history of time in all times and places. All right. So what I would ask you to do right now is to pause and write down numbers 1 through 6 and just keep that somewhere in a note-taking process. And then I'm going to go through them individually. All right, so hopefully you have those all written down, and I'm going to explain basically what each of these means. So we have all the things in the past that have ever happened, all right? Number 1 here, so this reddish area and everything in between in the circle basically are the events observed by someone. So the big blue thing is everything. And so it's kind of like that old adage, like if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it actually make a sound? And the reality is that that's everything in the past. Like there is a smaller, finite amount of things that people have seen. All right. And then number 2 are the things in green, which you see get even smaller, the things that are observed and remembered. All right. Because if you saw it, but you don't remember it, it's just lost. It's just gone. All right. And then we get to 3. These are the things that are observed, remembered, and recorded. Okay, so number 3 here, this brown circle and everything in between here is everything that was basically written down. So if you look at world history, if you look at the history of ancient civilizations, really one of the key elements of civilization was that idea of recorded history. Once that started to happen, that basically created this idea of kind of history and the growth of civilization, because we could remember the events that had happened and then document them. And if you even go back even to the cave drawings, that was kind of a notice to people like, hey, watch out, there's a bunch of lions over there that want to eat you. Or, hey, watch out for the buffalo, they're here, and if they trample you to death, you will die. All right. So then once we get into then the surviving records, we get to number 4. And that's kind of what I just mentioned, like the things that have lasted the test of time. If you've ever heard of in France, the Lascaux caves, there's caves from, thousands and thousands of years ago that show humans or a human-like creature was basically living there and detailing a record of the things that they saw. All right. So this is kind of the interesting part. Like when we go to 3 to 4, there's a lot of things that go away and that they end up kind of being ruined, or they break, or they disintegrate. And so a lot of our records of the past don't always survive and are forgotten. I mean, we can look at various counts of this, of fires or floods or different examinations of history. We're currently in a situation where now we get into 5, this little yellow thing is the idea that are usable records. There are things that are now being transcribed into digital format, which we think is going to last forever. However, what happens if there's no power anymore to run computers, or the system is lost, and then all of this technological information we have stored in these computers is just deleted? And that's one of those balances that has happened in history, and the argument of historians of don't get rid of all these written texts, because what happens if the digital age goes by? So anything that's recorded and usable gets into this yellow section of what we think is the historical account. But then the reality is everything that we look at is here, and it's actually outside of the past. So the reality is that historians use whatever they can find in these big circle. And the reality is that all we can find today about the past is in this little yellow circle. And as historians, what we eventually provide is the account, which isn't actually what happened ever. All right. We try to find as many believable and usable records as we can. But the reality is the product, the things that we read, all the collection of every textbook is just taking all of these believable things and putting it into a tale of the account. And that's something that's very important to think of. And especially when we get into this idea of observed ideas. And this is what we're going to do in the next assignment today. We're going to kind of examine and evaluate like what is observed and how valid is that. For those of you that took U.S. history last year, the OPVL process, the origin, purpose, value, limitation, or what you did in AP U.S. history with the DBQ, these are the things that we test in history. And when we test those things, we try to find the best, valuable, and the least limited sources to provide our account. Okay, so with that said, and we'll come back to this over the next couple of years and talk a little bit more about it. You'll see it again. I want you to go into Schoology and click on this quiz. All right. So this is kind of a little fun activity. I want you to try to engage with it. It's much easier to do in person, but I put this together to try to kind of engage your idea of observable history. So the first thing I want you to do is click on this PDF. Okay. And I want you to open it up and I want you to just take a minute to look at it. Try to examine as much as you can of the picture. Okay, see what's happening, try to develop in your brain as it's loading here the idea of what you see and what's going on and everything you can note. Okay, don't look at it for more than a minute. All right, so kind of test yourself. And then as you're done, go in and take the quiz. You only get a couple minutes to take the quiz, so you got to go kind of fast. All right, so do your best at doing this, and I'll talk about in the day 4